All right, we have one more speaker left in this session before we go to lunch. So we had now the perspective of in-person engagement with people. We had the perspective of building online communities and how that fits into your business communities. Now we're bringing on another really unique perspective. We're going to take a look at the psychological aspect. Why do people contribute? What actually motivates them? What gets people to participate in these online communities? Our next speaker basically researches behavioral economics, behavioral psychology for a living. She's the co-founder of Irrational Labs with Dan Ariely, where they help companies like Google apply behavioral economics to their practices. And they're constantly looking at why people make decisions, why people take the actions that they do. They have amazing stories. It's going to provide, hopefully, a very practical perspective on how to understand why your members are contributing to your community and create an environment that encourages more people to contribute. So, our last speaker for this session, please, one more big CMX welcome for Kristen Berman!
So totally a tangent right when we begin, but I just did Tony Robbins. Has anyone done Tony Robbins? So you can learn a lot from people like him, and it was so energizing, and when everyone walks in the room, they just scream, so I felt a little bit like I was Tony Robbins, but I'm not going to scream at you, so no worries. So I want us today to think about the idea of contribution, the science of contribution, as really the science to do anything, right? The science to have any motivation to do work. And so I'll talk about how we think about some of those drivers, and hopefully inspire people to develop actual changes to their platform or changes to their strategy that would get people to contribute or actually just do anything a little bit more. Great, but to start, what we're gonna do, let's make sure that goes, is to think about kids and markers. So I want you to place yourself in preschool when you basically had only one decision to make, which was what do you do during your free time? There was a lot of things out there. There may have been other kids to play with. There may have been cards, and there were definitely markers. So researchers, to understand motivation, went into a preschool and took the kids that liked markers, and they said, we will understand you. And they sat them, and they broke them into 3 groups. In one group, they called them over, and then the researcher was sitting down and said, do you want to play with markers? And almost all of the kids said yes. And then the other group, they said, do you want to play with markers? And do you want a reward? It's called a good player reward. There's a blue ribbon. There's a gold star. Would you like this? And again, almost all the kids said yes. And then for the third group, what they did is they said, do you want to play with markers? They had them play with markers, and then somebody else came in and said, wow, that is a really good drawing. Here's a good player reward. So the question is, what do these kids later on, after the researchers leave, do with their free time? Do they play with markers more or less, given what condition they were in? So what we think about gamification and rewards, what would we expect? We'd expect the kids who got the reward to actually play with markers more. We'd expect the quality of their drawings to be better because they're getting rewarded for it. But the interesting thing happened is that the people who got the reward, those kids got the reward when the researchers came back, and how they did is they basically had a glass wall. They stared at these kids as they were playing, and they did that 2 weeks later and 7 weeks later, and both times, those kids who got the reward played with markers less. And then their drawings were actually worse. But we're going to talk about the free time and why is it that people would play with markers less after you get a reward or you reward them for it. But to do that, we have to think about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. So extrinsic, very simple. You do something because of an external reward. Intrinsic, you do something because of an internal driver. The way I like to think about extrinsic rewards is when parents have to convince their kids to eat broccoli, and you would go, you need to eat broccoli, and if you eat broccoli, then you get to watch TV. And the question really for this is, do the kids just hate broccoli? Do they like TV? Like, what's going on here? And from the intrinsic reward perspective, what happens, the kid would never say, yeah, I'm just going to eat broccoli because I like it, after the parent has said, if you eat broccoli, I'll let you watch TV. But is it that they don't like broccoli? Or is it that they, what we call, have an over-justification problem, where they basically looked and said, broccoli must be terrible if my parents are doing this thing to me. If they're trying to bribe me to eat it, it must be horrific. And I definitely need a reward in order to do it. So we basically attributed the reason of why we're doing something to another external reward. And that's what happened with those kids with markers. That they just looked at the markers and then they're like, I'm not getting a reward? Do I really like markers? No, I like the reward. Where's my reward? Right? And so we've changed the whole game, and we've taken something, we have highly motivated kids who like markers, here's a reward, and now they don't want to play with markers unless they get a reward. So unfortunately, this is kind of how our work system works, right? Is where you say, actually, do you want to work overtime? And you would say, no, you have to pay me. That's how the game works. So we're taking away people's intrinsic motivation when we add these rewards. Now, I don't want to say all external rewards are bad. They're definitely not. But they're much worse when you're already motivated to do something, and we try to topple it with a reward. So then the key question is like, okay, so we think extrinsic rewards are not great for people who have at least some motivation. Then what about the right side, these intrinsic rewards? How the heck do we motivate that? Right? Because that's the gold. If you can like get that out of people, like game over, right? In any element of life, if you can get people to contribute or do something because they actually want to, what a cool thing. So we're going to go over 3 things. And I want to say drive, but I also want to say not kill, because it's so easy to kill this, right? And so the upside is that you get to drive it. The very easy thing that we can do, and we typically do, is just kill it. Okay, so the first one, Adam Grant, he's a researcher at Wharton. He goes to a call center. Now, if you think about call centers, what happens in call centers? You pick up the phone and you cold call people. It's like a really tough job, right? You're getting rejected consistently, time and time again. And so he says, how can we motivate these people? So he goes to a call center at Wharton that calls up people to get them to donate. So he calls up alumni and gets them to donate and says, how would we do this? So for one, he just brings in, he says, I have a very quick intervention. I'm just going to bring in a recipient of the scholarship and get them to talk to the call center reps for 5 minutes. He said, basically, he goes to the call center uppers, I only need 5 minutes of your time. They're just going to talk to this person. They get to ask them questions. And when they sat down, these call center reps asked them questions like, what did you do with your scholarship that you got? We're raising money for you. You got a scholarship. What did you do with it? What kind of classes are you taking? What are you going to do after school? And the person then said, you know, the organization had such a big impact. The scholarship had such a big impact on me. And the 5 minutes was up, and all went, like they just went back to their jobs. But when they measured them later, what happened is that these people had a 2x, sorry, this is so weird, 2x more time on the phone, and the money raised was through the roof. And it was just from this 5-minute intervention. So I think what we can think about this is just a duh for all of you guys in the audience, right? Interpersonal relationships matter. Like, it's the biggest duh we have in the community setting like this, is that actually connecting with somebody else is a huge motivator to take action. I think, unfortunately, the way we design a lot of our world outside of community-type stuff is that it's not that easy. So if you think about the person who made your car or the person who wrote your textbooks, are they actually getting to talk to you as you drive or you read? No, there's like not inherently those systems built to do this. But it's really nice insight for communities that this actually drives a lot of our motivation. The second thing I want to call out is that it wasn't an appreciation thing, right? It's not like the scholarship recipient said to the call center reps, like, thank you so much, you did such a good job. You know, there are different research on acknowledgement, but this is about meaning. This is about really calling out that what you're doing is impacting somebody else, and then showing them that's somebody else. So it's not an attaboy sort of thing. It's just saying, this is the reason you get up in the morning, here I am. And the third thing to think about, basically, is I hope what you're thinking is like, how could I increase the interactions between people? And you probably quickly go into this thing of like, wow, that's really expensive if I had to fly out my community members to meet each other, and live events are great, but man, that's a tough thing to operationalize. So these researchers tried something else. They tried a third condition, where they gave another set of call center reps just a letter. They said, you know what, we'll just have the recipients write something down. So they all wrote letters. For 5 minutes, they had them read the letters and said, you know, maybe this will increase motivation as well. Turns out it had no effect. So the nugget here is basically that the interaction with the recipient of, they call it contact beneficiary, is actually the meaningful thing. That's what we can derive meaning from. Okay, so we've got this one concept now of like basically visceral and specific connection, which I think is a duh for you, but now we have research to back it up. The second thing I want to think about is origami. But I actually want to think about how would you get people to like what they're doing? So now we have this idea that you can actually get up in the morning, but now how do we actually really enjoy what we're doing. And so Dan Ariely, who I work with at Duke, did this study where he said, let's understand this deeply and experimentally, and so let's make people build origami. So he handed them a sheet of instructions and said, go, please build origami. And if you've ever built origami, it's actually very tough, very frustrating. And so these people, they came out with their origami, and they handed it to the researcher, and the researcher was like, this is very interesting. Thank you. You spent some time on it. We appreciate that. And then she said to them, but actually the origami is ours. It's our experiment. It's our research. It's ours, but we'll give you the option to buy it. How much would you buy it for us? Or how much would you pay for it? And then they gave a number. And they take this number, and then they do the same thing. They walk across the area and say, okay, random person, and they call this external evaluators. Hey, random person, how much would you buy this origami for? And so what happened? There was a 5x premium that the person had who made the origami on it versus the random person who was just looking at it. This is kind of crazy, right? This is origami, and you're putting a 5x premium on it. Like, we know, if you look at it, we know if it's ugly or not, but apparently there's something else going on. So they did a follow-up study, and they said, you know what, let's just make this harder. Let's make the origami super ugly. So they elongated the instructions. So now people are sitting, and they're building the origami with long instructions, and they actually took out the example, so you don't really know if you're on point or not. So this origami was extremely ugly, and what happened? The effect was larger. So the people wanted to pay more for their own origami, and the external evaluators wanted to pay less, right? It was objectively uglier origami. So how we can think about this is basically we're put a premium on our own effort in something. We overvalue our effort relative to other people. In fact, an interesting follow-up study was, do we know that we overvalue our effort? So they asked the people and said, how much do you think other people would pay for it? And they said about the same thing that they would pay. So we don't even realize that we're overvaluing our effort when we're doing it. Another, we can kind of attach this to the idea, this concept of like our own ideas, right? We overvalue our own ideas, and we also think that everybody else will overvalue them. But this idea, we consult a lot of big companies, and this idea of getting people to put in effort or take more time is always seen as extremely controversial. Because you obviously, we study the inability to take action, decreasing friction, all these things, and it sounds like really terrible when you ask somebody, we should actually get the person to put in more effort, right? That's a fight that you usually don't really want to have. But the reality is when we put in effort, we are overvaluing or valuing things at a higher premium. Okay, so we've got allow and encourage effort. By the way, this can also be done in an online way, with just showing the effort that you're doing for the community. So there's nice research by Mike Norton at Harvard that looks at if you have he looks at an airline site called Yolna Kayak, and you say there's a spinny wheel, and if you're searching for flights and the spinny wheel comes up, and then you find flights, what happens versus if there's no spinny wheel between when you search and when the flights actually show up, or if there's a spinny wheel that actually says what the site is doing. We're looking through all the, we're optimizing the algorithm, we're finding the cheapest flight, all of these things. And what they found is that actually not having a spinny wheel and having the spinning wheel didn't have any effect. Having the spinning wheel and telling the effort that you're doing for other people actually had an effect. So not only do we value our own effort, but we also value the effort that other people are giving. More people bought flights just by telling the effort that you put in for that. Okay. So we have this idea that basically we can instill meaning from very small things. Origami, we can get people to overvalue things, even if it's just origami. Now I want us to think about how we get them to keep doing something, right? So they're doing it, now we just want them to keep doing it. So to study this one, again, it was Dan Ariely. This time I think he was at MIT for this, and he put in 2 conditions, and he said, let's play with some Legos. So he got people in, and he said, you're just going to build Legos, but you're going to build this structure, and after you build the structure, you'll get $3 from me. Great. And this is, they built the structure, you got $3. Okay, great. Do you now want to build another structure? This time you'll get $2.70 from me. And they kept going. Do you want to build another structure, right? So both conditions are getting this kind of sliding scale of of money in relation to how many structures they actually are going to build. And at some point, they just give up. They say, you know what, this stuff, it's just not worth it. I'm not going to build any more structures. The difference between the two conditions was very small, but really impactful. So what they did is in the condition where we say progress, all they did was basically build the structures, and then a researcher would move them out of the way. And so you'd have these structures that you've built just sitting to your right, a lot of Legos in the room, and so they just kept giving them new Legos, and there were structures. In the other condition, what happened is that they would build it. They'd say they'd build a $3 one, and then they'd push it to the side, and then a researcher would come and disassemble the one that they just built while they're building their next one. This is actually pretty cruel, right? So it's basically, it's comparative to like just digging a hole. Like prisoners have to sometimes dig holes, and then you just refill, and these are prisoner movies. You dig the hole, and then you have to refill the hole, right? Or you like push something up a hill, and then it falls back down, and you're pushing it up the same hill. Like this is kind of the like lack of progress feeling that feels just almost just cruel and wrong. And so we learned two things from this study. One is that actually people built less Legos. So in the condition where they saw the Legos sitting there, they built 11, and the other condition they built 7. Now 4 Legos is actually a lot. And this, I know like it may not seem like a lot, but 4 Lego structures is actually a huge effect. And we want to think in that in context of like, it's not like when you're building the Legos, like you know those Legos are eventually going to get taken apart. Right? It's like in no world would somebody think those Legos would stay there forever, like be mounted by the researchers. Like that just doesn't happen. So this is a really interesting effect that actually just seeing the Legos, which we know are deconstructible, sitting there was more motivating, extremely more motivating than seeing somebody take them apart. You're actually just destroying somebody's work in front of them. So right now we're thinking, yes, that makes sense, 11, and 7, right? They did a prediction study, and what a prediction study is basically asking people what they think will happen. And when we did that, we found that basically people only predicted 1 more Lego being built. So we don't really have this understanding of what it is and what it does to people when you take away their work. So imagine, and maybe you guys do, because if you delete somebody's post, I'm sure they're very upset about it. But this idea that you've created something and it's for nothing is actually extremely demotivating to people. So demotivating that when they looked at the people and said, "How much do you love Legos?" what happened was in the progress condition, the more Legos that you continued to build, the more you loved the Legos. But when they asked people how much you love Legos and it was in the futile condition, what happened? There was no love of Legos. They just took that away. So even the people who started out and said they liked Legos, they just killed the motivation for these people by destroying the amount of work. So that's what I say when we're not just trying to drive intrinsic motivation, we're really trying not to kill it, because it's so easy to kill internal motivation. Okay, so we've got these 3 things I want us to think about, which basically is this idea that meaning, you can get it from very, very small things, right? 5 minutes with a call center recipient, enough to do it. People are in their head, have this vision of the person that they're helping, of why they get up in the morning, and it's a small interaction that can motivate people to contribute more or do more. The second one is this idea of effort, that basically we value our own effort, and sometimes we overvalue our own effort, and many times we don't realize that we're overvaluing our own effort. But by getting people to put in effort, they'll like and they'll value the things that they do more. And the third thing, right, is that if we just show the progress. So show people what they're doing, and don't actually destroy it. Make people think that they're progressing to some larger goal, and we can potentially get more contribution, as well as increase, the liking and the affinity for what they're doing. Okay, so the last thing I want us to think about, basically, if you want to write down an idea about how you can increase contribution from one of your members and then share it with something else. So what is this going to do? You're going to write down your own idea. You're going to overvalue it. You're going to think about your members. So you're probably going to get more excited and more meaning from it. And then you're going to share it with somebody else. And so you'll feel more of the progress of your work. Manipulative? A little? A little. Okay, and that's it. So I think I have a few minutes for questions.